Hi everyone. This week we're going to be discussing microaggressions in the classroom. And you're probably wondering, but Hollander, this isn't actually in our textbook. And you're right, it isn't. But I think it's a really important topic that we discuss since we are learning about multiculturalism in the classroom and inclusive pedagogy. And also, all of us have mistakenly provided a microaggression to someone and have endured microaggressions themselves. So I think it's really important that we understand what is a microaggression, and more importantly, how can we prevent accidentally saying or doing something that is a microaggression in our classroom when we're teachers. So before we even get started on all of this microaggression stuff, we have to learn the terminology so we can express ourselves better when we talk about all this in class on Wednesday. So what exactly is a microaggression? A microaggression is a brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignity, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights or insults towards people of color. And I would add not just people of color, but also could be slights towards religion, sexuality, gender expression, ethnicity, and other things about us. So please note that microaggression is not just racial. And when we talk about environmental indignity, that might be something like there's been a lot of discussion about Confederate soldiers and their monuments around the country. Or, for example, at Nicholls State, we just renamed all our streets, which were named after plantations. And we have a library that's named after a major donor who also was a strong segregationist. So sometimes there might be environmental dignities, and sometimes we just say really stupid stuff to each other and don't even realize it until after the fact or until you or that person feels bad. For example, you'll see this woman who is wearing a hijab, and the microaggression she keeps experiencing is, "Where are you from?" And then when she replies, "Canada," "You were born in Canada?" Like, why is that an issue? I know a lot of faculty here on campus who may have strong ethnic names or a different color skin, and people are shocked that they were born in the United States, and they're surprised, or they're told their English is really good. Another one, this gentleman says, "You have a mental disability? You seem perfectly normal to me." Like they're disregarding the fact that he has this disability. Other things that people might say is, "You might not look a certain way that you're describing." They might just be surprised, like if you tell someone that you are not Christian, so if you're Jewish, they might start searching on your face for like what telling marks would make you Jewish, which is not right. Um, and sometimes people might say things to mixed race folks and say like, "Oh, I didn't know that you're black," or "I didn't know that you were half white," which again is rude. So consider that, and also consider some of the things that microaggressions you might have experienced. Maybe it had to do with being female or male or from southeastern Louisiana. Those could all be things that are microaggressions. So within microaggressions, we have micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations. So what do all those mean? A micro assault is a conscious and intentional action or slur, such as using a racial epithet or deliberately serving a white person before a person of color in a restaurant. An example I like to use is my brother-in-law is black, and we were at Disney World, of all places, and we were sitting there, and he was asked to take his baseball cap off at the dinner table. However, none of the white individuals dining in the same restaurant were asked to take his hat off. And it upset us so much as a family that we actually addressed it with the wait staff, and we're like, "Why did he have to take his hat off?" But next to us was another table with a gentleman, and he got to keep his hat on. And so pointing it out was a helpful tactic for them to address it. A micro insult is a verbal or non-verbal communication that subtly conveys rudeness or insensitivity, and demeans a person's racial heritage or identity. Easy one here. You are in an elevator with someone of another race and you clutch your handbag or your backpack closer to you. Maybe you lock the doors driving through certain neighborhoods. Those are all those are all micro insults. And then micro invalidations, these are communications that subtly exclude, negate, or nullify the thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of a person of color. And again, it's not just color, it can be race, ethnicity, sexuality, socioeconomic level, how you present yourself. Though those can all be micro validations. I think something that really sticks out is when someone is like, can't believe that a Jewish person feels insecure in a region that is very Christian, and can't believe that that person doesn't feel comfortable enough to share their religion. Or, for example, I used to live in San Francisco where you didn't really put much thought on how people presented themselves in sexuality because there were so many ways people represented themselves, and someone would say, wait, you're cisgendered? Or wait, I didn't know you're a lesbian. You dress really feminine. I mean, you're invalidating who this person is based on how they are presenting themselves. So really consider what you have experienced, both what you may have accidentally said and wish you had stuck your foot in your mouth after saying it, and also when you yourself have maybe experienced some sort of microaggression. So these slight comments, like I said before, they could be about just about anything. Your socioeconomic status, disability, gender expression or identity. You all are becoming secondary educators, and I think something that is so beautiful is you get to watch your students start to find themselves, and they might be having a difficult time trying to identify how they want to express. Also sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, nationality, and religion. These insults or insensitivities may be exhibited by students or adults within the school community. If anyone's ever watched South Park, they have the PC principal, and I think he's the perfect example of some of the ways that our students and faculty might feel about always having to be politically correct, like we're always walking on eggshells. But we also do need to consider our peers and our faculty's feelings before we open our mouths or do something. So here is a video on students' experience with microaggressions.
Quality writing makes your schoolwork better and helps you stand out in the process.
Think about a time when someone said something about some aspect of your identity that made you feel insulted or slighted, even if they didn't intend it. You probably experienced a microaggression.
A microaggression is something that someone says to someone else without knowing that it may be offensive. It hurts. So that's how I know it's a microaggression, because it feels disrespectful.
And it's not like outright racism, but it's something that is like almost unconscious in the way that you view people.
Most microaggressions are subtle and indirect, but they occur frequently in the daily interactions of members of historically underrepresented groups. And most often, people who commit microaggressions think of themselves as well-intentioned, non-racist, non-sexist people. They do not realize that the underlying messages communicated by their actions or comments are hurtful to other people.
One of my friends asked if my parents had their papers. I had a science teacher, a physics teacher, and he told me that I was the smartest black girl in his class. I've been asked if I understood what they were talking about, or do you need translation and stuff just based on my name. I'm not the spokesperson for the whole black community, but that's a microaggression I do experience a lot. They want the black perspective, and I'm usually the only black girl in the class. So it's okay, what's your take on this?
Oftentimes I get asked, do you know how to speak your native language? And when I answer I do,
it's just like, they're like, okay, well, what does Ching Chao mean?
There are three types of microaggressions: micro-assaults, micro-insults, and micro-invalidations. A micro-assault is similar to what we think of as overt discrimination. In the case of micro-assaults, those acts are intentional.
I was a server for a long time, and if anyone else was, you know this. In the back of the kitchen, like when someone gets a table of, like, say, Indian people, I hope this is PC, I don't know all the terms, but like Indian people or black people or anyone, they'd be like, who wants that table? I don't want it, they're not going to tip. And my heart would break every time.
I used to be a server too, and I hated it because I was like the only person of like, any type of race other than white. I remember coming in and they'd be like, oh, Danielle, you get that table of raccoons, and I was like, what? And they were like, yeah. And then I would go and I'm like, they're black people, and I was like, wait, is that what you call black people? You call them raccoons?
A micro-assault can be the deliberate posting of swastikas, Confederate flags, racial slurs or epithets that are left on a blackboard in a classroom.
I work as a research assistant, and so a while ago, one of the our new RAs, when I was a few months into it, came up to me and just mentioned that even though we'd known each other for months at that point, you're the least scary black guy I've ever met. In the way that I dress, the way that I talk, the way that I speak, I've kind of tailored that over the course of my education to be non-threatening.
I will literally have like my keys in my hand, like they're always with me, and I'll just like jingle them as I'm walking so that they know that I know that I'm there, so that we both know that I'm right here and I'm not going to try and do anything completely stupid. But on that note, there's also the stigma that like we're aggressive and intimidating.
It's sad you have to make sure you let people know you're not a threat. And that's jacked up.
One of my friends commented to me. He said, I don't really even think you're black. You're. And I was like, what? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you're smart. You do your work. Yes, you're athletic, but you do your work. You're smart. So I don't really know if you're black. I was like, I didn't understand. It made me question who I was and if I was still a part of the culture.
And that's an example of micro-invalidation and a micro-insult. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit more. A micro-insult is a comment that communicates the demographic group is not respected, that person is a slight exception to the stereotype. It's an insult, even though the perpetrator thinks he has just rendered a compliment.
Well, here at UNT, I've heard, you're so pretty for a black girl. I feel like it discounts me as a person, and then I feel like it discounts my race. I feel like you can be pretty just because you're a woman, or all black women are beautiful, all people of color are beautiful, just the same as people that are not people of color. So for them to make that specific statement, that's what I'm like, why? What in you made you say that to me? As if it were a compliment.
So another type of micro-insult is when students in the classroom are dismissed or treated almost as if they're invisible. For instance, in some of our sciences or engineering classes, there are few women, and professors often don't call on those women.
I had one instance in a statistics-based class where we were discussing something bell curve related, and he presented a question, and I don't remember exactly what the answer was, but I answered it, and he kind of doubted me, and he very condescendingly was just like, oh, okay, well, this is the best answer, but I guess your answer could be right. You know what, we'll ask, it was a grad student, he was like, you know what, we'll ask Dr. So-and-so and see what he thinks the best answer is. And there was no apology or anything. He was just like, oh yeah, Dr. So-and-so said that, yeah, that was actually a really acceptable answer. And I was just like, okay. What else is he going to doubt me on, and when else am I going to be called out in front of 70 other people, and have a weird exchange that makes the whole room quiet? Like,
one of my science classes, my teacher had asked what I wanted to do, and I told the teacher that I wanted to be a psychiatrist, and immediately they're like, that's too hard for you, maybe you should try a different field, or have you ever thought about being a nurse practitioner. Nurse practitioners in psychiatry make pretty well. They make a lot of money too. Have you thought about that? Like, why go to med school? Genuinely, sometimes somebody might feel like they can't make it, and then when you continue to tell them that, it does hurt.
I've had a lot of professors tell me in my face that they were surprised that I was as good as a student as I was, and that I paid attention in class and actually participated. And when I asked why, they said, well, you just come off as a troublemaker. You have all these piercings and short hair as a girl and tattoos. And we just naturally assume that you weren't really going to be any good.
Another type of micro-insult is when a professor says to a student, wow, you speak really good English. The message is, the professor thinks I don't really belong here, or that I'm not really American. Of course I speak good English. I'm born in the United States. But the professor sees a Latina or an Asian and makes the assumption that that person is foreign, or at least that is what the target hears. This is my message when somebody asks if you're legal, but you don't belong to this country. Then you don't belong. That's right.
We were walking into the gym once, and I was a guest, so I had to hand the person my ID. And he was looking at my name and everything. He's like, what are you? And I was like, well, what are you asking? He was like, what nationality are you? I was like, okay, I'm Lebanese, I'm Arab.
He's like, you got one of those that blow things up, are you? No offense, though. What kind of crazy stuff?
Yeah.
You ask someone, you get what I'm saying?
And I was just really surprised. Like, it totally blew my mind that someone would think that.
The assumptions I get the most is that I'm very academic and that I'm very good at math. When they assume stuff like that, it makes me feel like they're taking the individual out of who I am and just assuming that all the people who look like me act like me, and it kind of makes me feel lesser of what I can do.
Lesser of what I can do. What a shame, right? I mean, that is not how we want our students to feel. I'm going to post the rest of this YouTube video on our Moodle module, so if you'd like to continue to watch it, you're welcome to. I do wonder, though, what resonated with you? What did you hear? And I know it's not just racial, right? I know that the females and the males in my class have probably had things said to them like, oh, wow, I didn't know girls could do that, or I didn't know guys could be into that. And things like that just really invalidate who we are. And so it's very important that us as teachers and role models, that we do our very best not to fall into these traps of accidentally micro insulting someone or invalidating them. Or I doubt any of you are going to do any micro assaulting, but what if that happens in your classroom from student to student? How do we handle that? So what are the impacts of experiencing microaggression? Racial microaggression creates a hostile and invalidating climate for people of color, as well as those of different sexualities, religions, and ethnicities and socioeconomic status. And it saps their spiritual and psychic energies, and their cumulative nature can result in depression, frustration, anger, rage, and loss of self-esteem, anxiety, etc. I am sure we have all witnessed in a classroom a student who starts acting out because a teacher has invalidated them or insulted them. And I think it's really important for us to think about our students' behaviors and why they change, and is it due to microaggression? So what if you experience microaggression? And I think this is a skill that we need to teach our students as well. So if you notice that you have a very hostile classroom for whatever reason, if maybe something's going on in your community, you may want to discuss what should we do if we experience microaggressions. So step one is you need to assess the situation. You need to find a way to pause from assuming or reacting right away. Many times, people don't realize that the words coming out of their mouth, how hurtful they are, or maybe they don't know enough about your culture, your race, your sexuality, to understand that what they've said is actually quite insulting. So if it's the first time, and the incident is new, you could ask the person to repeat what he or she said. And that gives them a moment to go, should I have said that? Or maybe they can reword it in a way that's not nearly as insulting. You can also kind of tell if they repeat it, like what's their MO, what's their motivation behind saying that. It could be just an inappropriate question that comes from like a good, curious place, or it could be something where they are really trying to validate you or insult you. Your first concern must be that you are safe from physical, emotional, and psychic abuse of any kind. So you also need, while they're repeating themselves, to identify if you're in a safe space to address this, because your safety is number one. Then you need to ask yourself the following: what kind of risk will I be taking if I address this? Is this a particular action worth my time and effort? And do I know what I want to achieve, right? Like what is the bottom line if you're going to address this microaggression? Maybe it's a really good friend of yours or someone you're getting to know, and you want to create clear boundaries and also express to them that what they asked was actually inappropriate and teach them how to ask that better. It might also be that you just want to get as far away from the situation as possible. So maybe you just want to move on and walk away. If it's someone who is delivering this microaggression that has some power, so if it's your teacher, your professor, your coach, you might want to identify, like, is this worth your time and effort? And more importantly, is this the person that you need to be addressing this with, or should it be with somebody else? So you really need to think about this, because if you're taking a massive risk, then it might not be worth it, particularly if it's going to lead to physical or emotional harm down the road. And you also have to identify if it's worth your time. Is this someone that you will be consistently interacting with and someone that you want to be interacting with, or do you leave it alone and just walk away from the situation? And then, unfortunately, you have to model the behavior, right? You can't just go after somebody. You need to model the behavior. So always model the behavior you want from the person or people you are confronting. So that might mean no yelling, but just acting calm, taking a deep breath, speaking very calmly to that individual. It's a very good idea to stay away from being sarcastic, snide, mocking, or arrogant, even though this can be very tempting, right? Like, how easy would it be for you to just throw a sarcastic remark right back at them? But that is not what you're going to want from them. And also, you have to remember, what is it that you want to achieve? If you really want to instruct someone on some part of who you are, if it's your ethnicity, your race, your sexuality, your socioeconomic status, this is a beautiful learning opportunity. So using a sarcastic remark is not going to be helpful in this situation. Again, remember, the goal here is to educate. It's not about winning a point or making someone feel bad or wrong. It's about helping them understand something from a different perspective. So if you're dealing with someone who has a massive ego and has to be right all the time, you might want to identify if it's even worth you engaging in. And again, like I said, you need to keep your eye on the prize. You should be able to educate someone on it. I have a very difficult time with this. I become very condescending when someone says a microaggression to me. And so this is something that I really have to work on. For example, I was explaining to an individual today about the increase in hate groups in the various parts of the United States. And they were like, really? I don't believe you. I don't think that's true. I mean, I think you should feel safe. And I immediately wanted to go on the attack. And I had to take a step back, take a deep breath, speak calmly to them, and then show them the Southern Poverty Law map of hate to show them that these groups do exist, and they do exist in our region. So, I think you really need to consider you modeling that behavior. Or maybe you need to just walk away, right? Like, is it truly worth your time? So how to respond? A recap. Focus on the actual event and not on the person saying or doing the insult. So again, you don't want to start personally attacking that person. You want to focus on the words that were said or the actions that you observed, and then you need to stay calm and discuss how you learn about various cultures and why what the person said or did was insulting. And then put yourself in the other person's shoes, right? Like, how many of us have said something really dumb and then want to shove their foot back in their mouth and wish that they never had said it to begin with? We've all been there. And most of us, if we're empathetic human beings, are going to be super embarrassed. So please use humility if you are going to respond to a microaggression. And I really hope that you receive that humility back. So have you experienced an aggression, insult, or invalidation? There's a lot of ways that teachers accidentally do this. For example, failing to learn to pronounce or continue to mispronounce the names of students after they have corrected you. I have experienced this myself where I've tried really hard to learn students' names and still mess up. But also I've had students come to me in tears because their teachers continue to call them the wrong name, even though they've corrected them a few times. Scheduling tests and projects on due dates of religious or cultural holidays, or dinging students for not attending class during a holy day themselves. Disregarding religious traditions or their details. For example, disregarding the impacts of your students fasting during Ramadan or Yom Kippur. I mean, it's really important that you know that your students are fasting, but also don't have a class food party and don't expect them to run a mile in your physical education course. Setting low expectations for students from particular groups, neighborhoods, or feeder patterns. I mean, hello, all of us have heard teachers say, oh, those kids are coming from this elementary or middle school. They're not going to do so well. If you go into your classroom with that mindset, those students are not going to do that well. You need to have a growth mindset for everybody. Calling on, engaging, and validating one gender, class, or race of students while ignoring other students during class. Last semester, I attended a science lesson where the female teacher kept calling on the same 3 white gentlemen in the front row of the class and nobody else. And it drove me bonkers. And I think that's something that you all need to consider. And we've discussed with our classroom management, our responsive classroom management, that you can avoid that with the different methods we've discussed. Assigning students tasks or roles that reinforce particular gender roles or don't allow all students flexibility across the roles and responses. My biggest pet peeve is when you have the female students do the cleanup or be the secretaries. Give me a break. We can all clean up and we can all act as the secretary of a group. More examples: anticipating students' emotional responses based on gender, sexual orientation, race, or ethnicity. This is a really difficult one, right? But it is important that you recognize that not all girls are going to cry and not all boys are going to suck it up and be tough. Using inappropriate humor in class that degrades students from different groups. If you like to use humor in your lessons, you need to be very careful to ensure that your humor is politically correct. Expressing racially charged political opinions in class, assuming that the targets of those opinions do not exist in your class. If you are extremely conservative or extremely liberal, that does not mean that you can disregard your students who may feel the opposite of you. And using terms like illegals to reference undocumented students or immigrants. Hosting debates in class that place students from groups who may represent a minority opinion in class in a difficult situation. Don't do that. Don't ask your one black student or your one Hispanic student or your one Asian student to provide the argument for slavery or to provide the opinion of an entire group of individuals. Don't do it. And singling out students in class because of their backgrounds, like where they live or their socioeconomic status. A few more. Expecting students of any particular group to represent the perspectives of others. Denying the experiences of students by questioning the credibility or validity of their stories. If a student tells you about an experience they've had as a child from living down to Bayou or growing up in a white neighborhood or growing up in a racially diverse neighborhood, don't discredit them. Just don't. Assigning class projects or creating classroom or school procedures that are heterosexist, sexist, racist, or promote the oppression of others, even inadvertently. When you're coming up with your classroom norms, you really need to think about who is making up your classroom and how we were not going to fulfill various stereotypes. And obviously, please do not use sexist language in your class. So on Wednesday, we are going to do this think, pair, share assignment. Thank you all for listening about microaggressions, and have a great day.